My name is Detective Pierce. For most of my career, I've worked in the shadows, in places where the law struggles to reach, where evil hides behind ordinary faces. I've seen my fair share of human darkness, but nothing quite prepared me for the call I received on a late October evening. It was meant to be a day off, a rare one, yet instead of resting, I found myself in the passenger seat of a police cruiser, being driven toward the edge of town where the lights of a carnival glittered like 1,000 promises in the cold night air. Only this wasn't a carnival anymore. It was a closed-off crime scene. The park's towering Ferris wheel loomed in the distance, frozen mid-turn, its seats swaying slightly in the wind as if someone invisible still rode it. The call had been simple, an incident at Hollowgate Amusements, a seasonal park that opened only in the autumn, famous for its haunted attractions. A body had been found, a young man, inside one of the rides. The caller's voice had been tight, controlled, but beneath it, I caught the tremor of someone who had seen something they wished they could forget. The police cruiser rolled to a stop, its headlights sweeping over an empty parking lot littered with paper cups, candy wrappers, and a distant echo of tinny carnival music still playing somewhere inside. Officers moved about quietly, their radios crackling. Beyond them, the gates of the park stood open, their painted archways smiling down in grotesque parody, the grinning clown faces peeling with age. Inside, the smell hit me first, sweet, cloying candy floss mingled with the unmistakable metallic tang of blood. The park was silent except for the occasional creak of metal and the low hum of generators. As I walked past a row of stalls with faded prizes hanging limply in the cold night air, my eyes caught something strange, a single trail of wet footprints, bare, leading deeper into the park. They weren't there for decoration, they were fresh. We reached the scene. The ride in question was called the Tunnel of Whispers, a slow-moving boat attraction where guests floated through narrow, dark passages lined with animatronics whispering eerie phrases. Now the lights inside were off, and the only sound was the slow drip of water from the ceiling. The young man lay slumped in the boat, his face pale, his eyes wide open. There was no visible wound, but his expression told me everything. He had died in terror. His lips were stained dark, and his fingernails were torn, as if he had tried to claw at something in his final moments. The officer beside me, a man named Keller, muttered that no one had touched the body yet. But the weird thing is, Pierce, he added quietly, the ride wasn't running, and the water pump was off. No one knows how he even got in there. As I stepped closer, I noticed something else, something the officers had missed. The boy's wrist bore a faint smear of black paint, almost like grease, but too fine in texture. I bent down and caught the faintest scent of smoke. This wasn't ordinary paint, it reminded me of the soot from an old chimney. My gaze drifted upward to the walls of the tunnel, where I spotted tiny shapes scratched into the wood. They were crude symbols, drawn hastily, but unmistakable to me. I had seen them before, during a case years ago in New Orleans. They were part of an old ritual, one whispered about in certain occult circles, said to bind something inside a place, or to invite it in. I straightened slowly, my mind racing. This wasn't just a death, it was a message, and whatever left that message was still here. The park seemed even quieter after we left the Tunnel of Whispers, as though the very air was holding its breath. Keller stayed close, but I could tell he was uneasy. Every so often he glanced over his shoulder, his hand twitching near his holstered sidearm. I didn't blame him. Something about Hollowgate felt wrong, not just in the way a place feels after a tragedy, but in a deeper, older sense, like the ground itself remembered something it wanted to forget. The trail of bare footprints was still there, glistening faintly in the flickering light from the overhead bulbs. They led us through a narrow row of game stalls where stuffed animals hung like limp trophies, their button eyes staring blankly into the night. We followed them until they ended abruptly in front of an attraction called the House of Mirrors. I've always hated mirror mazes. There's something about the way reflections multiply, distorting reality, making you second-guess every step. Even in daylight they're unnerving. At night, in a deserted amusement park, there's something else entirely. The entrance gaped open like a mouth waiting to swallow us, its frame painted with more peeling clowns. From inside came the faint sound of something. Not footsteps, not exactly. More like a low, rhythmic tapping, echoing through the glass labyrinth. Keller muttered a curse under his breath. "Pierce, you sure we—" "Yes." I cut him off. My voice was steady, but my pulse was quickening. "We go in." The mirrors greeted us with infinite copies of ourselves, each one dimly lit by a strip of cold fluorescent light above. The tapping grew louder, then stopped, replaced by a whisper. At first I thought it was the wind moving through the structure, but then the whisper formed words, soft, slow, and chilling. I couldn't understand the language, but the cadence was unmistakable. A chant. Somewhere ahead, one mirror was wrong. While every other reflection moved with me, that one didn't. I took a slow step forward and saw that the figure inside wasn't me. It was someone else entirely. A tall, thin man with eyes so dark they seemed like voids, his mouth curling into a grin too wide for his face. He raised his hand slowly and pressed it to the glass. The glass beneath his palm darkened, spreading outward in jagged lines like cracks in ice, but instead of shattering, it seemed to ripple, as if it was no longer solid at all. I felt a sudden cold seep into the air, and every instinct I had screamed at me to back away. Keller didn't see him. "Pierce, what are you looking at?" I blinked. The figure was gone. The glass was ordinary again, my own reflection staring back. "Nothing," I lied. "Let's keep moving." The footprints resumed beyond the exit of the mirror maze, but now they were joined by something else, thin black streaks, like trails of soot, leading toward the far end of the park, where the rides loomed taller and more skeletal in the dark. That's where the Ferris wheel stood, still frozen in place, its metal frame groaning softly in the wind. As we approached, I noticed the ground beneath it was wet, not from rain, but from something thick, dark, and almost oily. It pooled around the base of the wheel, reflecting the sparse light like liquid obsidian. My eyes caught movement above, one of the gondolas swaying more violently than the rest, as if someone inside was rocking it. We shone our flashlights upward, and that's when I saw it. Not a person. Not exactly. It was hunched, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The moment the beam touched it, it froze, and I had the sickening feeling it was now staring directly at me. The wind shifted, and faintly, impossibly, I heard that same whispering chant from the tunnel of whispers, now carrying across the park, weaving through the rusted metal and flickering lights. I didn't need to understand the words to know one thing with certainty. This wasn't just a haunting. Someone had awakened something here, and they hadn't bothered to send it back. The gondola stopped swaying. Whatever had been inside was no longer there. I scanned the ground, searching for movement, but the shadows between the rides were thick, their edges shifting unnaturally in the dim light. Keller tightened his grip on his flashlight. "Pierce, I think we should call this in," he said, his voice low. "And say what? That we're chasing ghosts in an amusement park?" His silence told me everything. The footprints led us beyond the Ferris wheel, toward the farthest corner of Hollowgate, a section of the park neither of us had noticed before. The path narrowed, bordered by rusting fences and long-forgotten food stands. At the end stood a small stage, its wooden boards warped from decades of weather. A faded sign above it read "The Grand Illusion Show." We stepped closer, and that's when I saw them. Dozens of old audience chairs, all occupied. The figures seated there were dressed in Carnival-era clothing, their faces pale, their eyes unblinking. Wax statues, I thought, until one of them tilted its head ever so slightly to follow our movement. The chanting began again, louder this time. It came from behind the stage curtain, a low, pulsing rhythm that seemed to sink into my bones. Keller's flashlight flickered as if the batteries were dying, but when I checked mine, the light stayed strong. We mounted the steps to the stage. The chanting stopped. Silence closed in, thick and oppressive. I pulled the curtain aside. There, in the center of the darkened backstage area, was a circle of mirrors, tall, warped, each reflecting not our bodies but something else. In those reflections, Keller and I were gone. The scene instead showed the park in its prime, crowds laughing, rides spinning, lights blazing. And in the middle of it all was the tall, thin man from the House of Mirrors, his grin wider now, his hands outstretched as if presenting the park itself. The oily black substance pooled at his feet in the reflection, but when I looked down at the real floor, it wasn't there. I stepped forward, and the glass in the nearest mirror rippled like water. Keller grabbed my arm. "Pierce, don't." Too late. My hand broke the surface. It was cold. Not the kind of cold that numbs the skin, but the kind that bites deep, straight to the marrow. I pulled back immediately, and when I did, my palm was smeared with the same oily black streaks we'd seen earlier. Suddenly, the wax-like audience began to move. Slow at first, then faster, their heads turning toward us in unison. One by one, they rose from their seats, their feet dragging across the warped boards. The air grew heavy with the scent of mildew, and something metallic. That's when I saw it. A small, leather-bound book on the floor near the center mirror. Its pages were covered in the same language as the chant. I didn't have time to read it, but I knew what it was, a ritual ledger. Whoever had performed the rites here had anchored the presence to this place through those mirrors. "Smash them!" I barked. Keller didn't hesitate. He drew his baton and brought it down hard on the nearest mirror. It didn't shatter normally. Instead, it burst outward in a spray of black liquid, vanishing before it hit the floor. The audience froze mid-step. The tall man's image wavered. We smashed another mirror, then another. Each time, the park in the reflection dimmed, its colors bleeding into gray. The chanting returned, but this time it was frantic, desperate. By the time the last mirror fell, the figures on the stage collapsed like marionettes with their strings cut. The air lightened, and the wind outside carried the faintest sound of a creaking ride. Just the wind now, nothing more. We left Hollowgate without speaking. Keller drove, his knuckles white on the wheel. As the park receded in the rearview mirror, I thought about the tall man's grin. The mirrors were gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, in some other place, he was still smiling, and still watching.